This is just a short class this morning, and all I'm doing, I'm going to introduce to this book the small group dialogue, the 12 Old Testament stories, how it works, and you can, if you don't have it yet, it'll help you decide, do you want to get this or do you not want to get this, but 12 lessons in here you can do. So what this is, this small group dialogue book is 12 Old Testament Bible lessons. And the way I chose the 12 lessons was from John's work. He has stories that he has chosen that are the overview stories. And since I trust him implicitly, I chose those 12 stories because when people get through those 12, they will have a good overview of the Old Testament. So one thing I'm always a little bit curious about is, we've all been in Bible studies, and I guess I'm just always a little curious to know, for you, what makes a good Bible study, or what makes you to leave a Bible study? I know for myself, at our church, we'll start a new Bible study, and we'll have 30 people sign up, and by the third week, we're lucky if even 10 are still coming. And so I've always wondered, why do people leave? Why do people stay? So if you just want to share a few insights with me on that, what makes you stay with a Bible study, or what makes you leave one?
Interaction's important from my observations and participation.
Okay.
For me, I tend to want to leave when I find out that all the interactions is the speaker giving a question that has a pre-assumed answer, and we have to spend our time guessing what it is.
Yeah.
And every time we get it wrong, you say, well, that's pretty good, but it's not what I'm looking for. I thought, well, that's the last time I'll answer a question.
Yeah. Anybody else?
The interactions and people being genuine with their responses.
Yeah.
That keeps me there. So if I'm not getting that, then I definitely, I just lose interest. And if it's too scripted, if it just feels like it's very regimented and we have to stay with the paperwork and there's like no room for discussion, then that loses me too.
Yeah.
I want to dive into, I want to dissect, I want to understand. So I need all that.
Yeah. I was in a Bible study where we actually had real questions that we wanted, and the leader would say, no, we only have 20 more minutes to get through these 10 questions, so you can't ask anything. They were all like, but that's what we want to know. So yeah, that's been our experience, my experience too, is that we sit in a circle and the leader asks a question and we all sit back and we wait for that one smart guy to give the answer, and nobody else contributes. And so there's no interaction. I've actually been at Bible studies where at the end of 8 weeks or 12 weeks, I'm looking across and thinking, I don't know that woman's name. And that's kind of sad. If you're in a small group, you should know everybody. So, the Bible study I've done, the small group dialogue, is definitely not scripted. It's definitely different. What I was shooting for when I created this was to learn the Bible stories through the power of dialogue. That's really what I wanted. And to understand that dialogue is different than debate, it's different than discussion. Sometimes with dialogue, everybody is sharing, and really with dialogue, I find myself spending more time listening than actually talking. And I think that's a good thing. And very often with dialogue, we get to the end of a lesson, and I've left with more questions than I came in with. There are things that I'm just not sure about. But then I like that, because then for the rest of the week, that story stays with me. I keep coming back to that story, and I'll research it, or I'll read it. And, I keep picking at it to get to those questions. If I go to a class and it's just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, and it's all cut and dried, when I leave, it doesn't stay with me. I don't do any application. I don't return to the story. I don't, it's just too dry for me. So when I wrote this, I had 5 goals in mind that tied back to the power of dialogue. And the first one was that idea of building relationships with people, because that's what bothered me so much in the studies I went to. Like I said, there were times I didn't even know the name of everybody in the class. So I really think that whole idea of building relationships with other Christians, like Chris was talking this morning, how important that is with the youth group. And I agree that, and I think it's every bit as important with our adult groups. We really, really need to build those relationships. I taught this, last year, and I was shocked at some of the people in our group. We had one person in our group who I would have never known. He's very knowledgeable in Hebrew and brought a lot of knowledge to the group. Another person in the group who knew tons and tons of history and could talk intelligently about the Roman Empire, and it really gave a lot of good insights to the stories. So one of my goals then is that we share our knowledge and share our insights and dig deeper into the stories. Another one of my goals was to be able to tackle the tough issues. I get a little, I don't know, we go to Bible study and it seems like so often it's the pat answer. It's like if somebody asks something and you don't know what to say, you just say, well, Jesus loves you. It's the pat Bible answer. And so I would like to deal with some of the tough issues, especially now with COVID and the pandemic. We've got a lot of tough issues. And I would like to look at truth and what is happening to truth in our country. And I would like to look at even some of the social issues that we deal with. And I would just like some discussion and some insight on that. One of my biggest goals was to know God and know his truth. And I'll be real honest with you, I've been Christian since 2010. And that was the first time in my life that I can remember hearing people say, you need a relationship with God and you need a relationship with Christ. And I thought, what? That was just an odd concept to me. But now I understand that. So when I first started Bible study, it was just all about getting it up here because I didn't know anything about the Bible. I knew nothing. And so it was a lot of just trying to learn the stories, learn how this person was related to that person, and just learn the sequencing and the history of it. But eventually, with time, I started to understand that you can't love what you don't know. And so it's the building of that relationship. And then my final goal is to learn the stories. I just think that's crucially important that we be able to share these stories and tell these stories. So if I were to redo this, I think I would maybe have just one goal for this book, and that goal is creating disciples. You know, the more and more I think about it, the more and more I think maybe that's the only reason we do Bible study, is to create disciples. And all of these things fall underneath there. And we create disciples through that slow but permanent change. The way this book works is that there are 12 lessons. And every week there's a different story. And every week there's a different activity. You learn as you do these things. One thing I learned is that the first lesson I put in here is the most difficult activity. And now I look back and I think, well, that probably was not a good idea. Let's start it with something a little easier. But anyway, but I like that every week's a different story and every week is a different activity, because you can tell people, if you didn't like this week's activity, don't worry about it. Next week's a different one. Okay, we'll be fine. But what is consistent is that every week we follow a consistent pattern with how the lessons are taught, and there's a consistent pattern with the methods that we use. And so that's what I'd like to look at just a little bit today to get you all on board with this. Okay, So let's look at the procedure for teaching all 12 of these lessons. The procedure is very, very consistent. It's only the story that changes, and it's the activity that changes. So on the procedure, for myself, the first thing I had to put down was open your meeting with a prayer, because I have to admit, one of these days they're going to rescind my Christian card, because so often I'm halfway through a meeting and I'm like, oh, I guess we were supposed to pray, but I think the Holy Spirit's here, so we'll be fine. You know, I'm terrible with that, but you know, it's just nothing I grew up with. So, but it's important though, open that with a prayer. Then the next thing that we'll do when you get into lessons 2, 3, and 4, I found that it's very important to go back and review what you did the week before. And I have that review built into every lesson. When you teach your lesson, when you get to the end, one of the activities that you will have people do is to write a very short summary of the story. And keep that summary simple. And when I say short, I mean short. I don't care how long the story is. Your summary shouldn't be over 3 or 4 sentences. Now, being the language arts teacher, I also put an option in there that you could summarize it through poetry. And most people don't like that, but I do it anyway. So, because here and there you do get a person that wants to do the poem. So that summary that you do at the end, that's a great way to open your next class, because it's important to understand that these are not individual stories. And I know Mark talked about that a lot in his classes, that there's a connection here. And it took me a long time to figure that out too. I just thought I had, you know, I thought it was like an anthology. Oh, here's a short story by Moses. Here's one by David. Here's one. And then I found out that, oh, these are all connected. So I think that's why I want everybody to write a summary at the end, because then when you get to the end of the book, you can put those 12 summaries together and you have a nice overview of the Old Testament, okay? And if you do it through poetry, it's a lot more fun. Am I convincing anybody to do the poems? No? Okay. Okay, so then after we do that summary, we do an opening question. Now, John likes to call those questions light and fluffy. I call them, I'm a QAR teacher, and I call those questions, they're called on my own questions. And it's the type of question you can ask someone that they can all answer it just based on their own knowledge, their own experiences, their own background. And that really is important. The question is tied to whatever the lesson is. So if we're going to do a lesson on truth, the opening question might be something about a time that you got in trouble for not telling the truth, or why is truth important, or something, but it'll tie into the lesson. But those on my own questions are important. There's a lot of research out there that shows if someone is in your class and they have gone 10 minutes without speaking, they're probably going to go the entire time and not speak at all. And I've found that to be true. So as you teach this, you start to know your people. You'll start to know who's confident enough to speak up during the class, and you start to find who's a little more introverted or a little more reticent. And those are the people that I try to kind of tease them out with that opening question, to get some great stories from them, to get some insights from them. And it's part of that relationship building. So just that little light, fluffy question that they can answer on their own. And if you've got a really good on your own question, you'll return to it toward the end and see how it fits the text that you're studying. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay. I always feel kind of bad about this class, because this is just kind of a sit and get. I'm just going to kind of talk to you, but next week I'm talking very little and you're doing all the activities. So after the opening question, then the first thing you'll do is you'll share the story, and you have several ways to do that. I would recommend the first 2, maybe 3 classes, you just learn the story and tell it. And one thing that I've learned, and John has tried so hard to teach this to me, and I've kind of fought him a lot, is when you tell that story in this class, don't be so formal about it. Don't let it be a formal presentation, which is kind of my telling style. I am very formal. I stand up and I'm very tight to the text. And I've learned that these lessons go so much better if I just am conversational. If I just get back and I say, well, God tested Abraham and he called out to him, Abraham, Abraham. Well, and you don't embellish the story, but just be more conversational with it. The reason for that is because it's not the only time that people are going to hear the story. These lessons are designed that when they get into the lesson, they have to open their Bible and go through the text. So they're going to see the actual word, the actual script. And that was another thing that was important to me, because I cannot tell you how many Bible stories I've been to, especially with the women's ministry, where nobody ever brings a Bible. We never open a Bible. And I'm thinking, how is this a Bible study? You know, we get to the end of the study and it's like, okay, I know a lot about the woman on the DVD that's speaking, but I haven't learned much about God or the Bible. So I really wanted people to open their Bible. So when you do that opening story, just be very casual, be very conversational about it. You make a mistake, you make a mistake. I don't hesitate to say, oh, wait, I need to back that up. I left a piece out. The other reason for that is that you don't want to be the teller for all 12 lessons. You want to get your people telling. And if they see that it's casual, if they see it's conversational, if they see it's just a friendly telling of the story, they will be faster to step up. And so you, by the third lesson, you can kind of gauge your people and pull someone aside and say, hey, next week, how about if you tell the story? And all the stories are in their study guide. So they've got the story there. We used all of John's work because he makes the stories very, very true to the text, but they're easier. You know, some of those names, those difficult names are left out and things like that. So it makes it easy for them to tell the story. And I find that that really helps a lot with the group and with building relationships when you get them to tell the story. By about the 6th week, I've got people saying, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. So that's a good thing. The other thing that you can do, and I would do this at least once, is, as Maggie said earlier, I think it was Maggie who said she's been watching John's stories, or has it been Chris? I can't remember. One of you had said you've been watching John's stories. Is that at BibleTelling.org? Is that where your stories are, John?
If they go to BibleTelling.org, they can sign up for the daily email service.
Yeah. So you can go to BibleTelling.org, look up the story that you're doing, and let John tell it to them. I think that's a good thing to do at least once, because he does just such a good job. It's very conversational. He's got the Bible insights. You can go through those. So you've got a lot of options for how to share that story, okay? So now we get into the activities. And like I said, every week the activity is different. But John helped me a lot in writing the instructions for the activities. We've both taught a lot of these activities using the instructions. So I feel pretty confident that for each activity, the instructions in the instructor's manual are pretty clear, pretty easy to follow. But let me tell you how they are consistent. I give them all the instructions for the activity, and then I have them just sit for about 2 minutes and think about the activity. So if the activity is the triangle that we're going to look at, when they get in with their small group, they are supposed to be sharing what were the three most important things to you in this story. I want them to first think about that a little bit on their own, because even though we're putting them in small groups of 3, it's still, even in a group of 3, it's easy to have that one person who is very dominant and takes over the group. But I find that if I make them do a little bit of individual work first, just jotting down a word, a phrase, an idea, when they get into that group, they're much more willing to share. Even if you've got that dominant person who says, well, I think this, if you've been jotting down ideas, you'll say, oh, yeah, I jotted that down, and they will contribute. So that little 2 minutes of individual work, that little bit of thinking time is so important before they go into groups. And then they go into small groups. I like groups of 3. I find that just really works well. I did teach a class in East St. Louis where I had 50 people in the class. So then I had to kind of put them in groups of 5 and 6, because when they come out of small group, you're going to be doing large group discussion. And if you've got 15 small groups to get through, well, you're not going to get through them. People aren't going to get a chance to talk. So I don't like more than 10 small groups. So depending on how many people you have in the class will determine how many go into your small groups. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, I like at least 3 in a group. And then, so in the small groups, I find it's real important then for you as the instructor, just keep popping around the room. Get to as many of those small groups as you can, because even though you've done an expert job of explaining the activity, even though you've gone through that, you've asked if they have questions, when they get into the activity, inevitably there are going to be those groups that are saying, what are we supposed to be doing? I don't get this. It's tough. It's tough. So get around from group to group to group to group. And my big thing when I get to those groups is not to provide answers, not to provide insights, just to make sure they're following instructions. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So when they get finished with their small groups, bring them all back into one large group. Have them still sitting in their small groups, and then I always tell them, in your small group, decide who's going to be the spokesperson. And then the way I run that is I'll say, okay, in your small groups, you all decided what were the 3 most important things on the story of David's anointing. And so I'll go to the first group and I'll say, who's your spokesperson? Share one idea. And stress that one, because otherwise they take over. They'll share that one idea and then pop around to your other groups and say, who wants to add to that? Who else has that same idea? Who wants to embellish on that? And then go to your next group and say, now share one of your ideas and share one of your ideas, so that you get to as many of those small groups as you can and have their spokesperson share what they know, and then let everybody contribute to that. Okay, questions?
Does the group decide on who the spokesperson is, or is that something you designate in a certain way?
No, I let them decide. And then sometimes too, depending on the activity, you might get to that group to share several times. Sometimes they share, so the first time you were the spokesperson, and the next time we come, Roger's going to be the spokesperson. They might take turns being spokesperson, but I let them control who's going to do that. And it's usually pretty straightforward. The groups, the dominant person shows up pretty quickly. So, yeah. Although I have already had groups where by group 8, I notice it's the same spokesperson all the time. And if I go to that group and I find that that person is dominating and other people aren't talking, I don't hesitate to shut that person down, and I'll ask questions, and I'll ask somebody else, would you be this week's spokesperson? Yeah. And the other thing too, I don't form the groups, I let them form their own groups, but I do, since there are 12 lessons, I tell them every week, today when you get with your group, try to get with people you haven't been with yet. And so I don't want the same 3 people together all the time, because we're not doing any relationship building if it's the same people all the time. I want them to change around, move around. Okay. Okay. So that individual time, the small group time, and the whole group time, that is the bulk of your lesson. I have never been able to get through that in less than 45 minutes. All of these classes in here, I can't do one in less than an hour and a half. My pastor wanted me to teach this one year. He said, well, I'll give you an hour on Sunday mornings. I said, well, then I won't do it, because if we're not going to do justice to the story, if we're going to rush through it, I'm just not going to do that. I just refuse. So I can't do one of these in less than an hour and a half. If you've got questions on age groups, I've done this book and these activities with anybody from 5th grade on up through adult. So it works. Lower than 5th grade, it's a little difficult. I think there are better activities that you can do with those younger kids, but 5th grade on up, they'll do fine.
Phyllis, I might add that Mickey's going to be giving a workshop that will deal with how to deal with the younger children.
Oh, yeah.
It's using the very same concepts, but it takes it down.
Good. Yeah, I want to get into that, because every time I'm at a conference with Mickey, we're presenting at the same time, and I've only been in her workshops once. I'm like, ooh, and it was really, really good. So I want to get into another one of her workshops. Okay, so you've opened with a prayer. You've can't read. You've opened with a prayer. You've had your questions. You've shared the story. You've had small group activity. You've had your big discussion. Then something I added that I didn't do when I first started this, when I bring them all back into the big group, I make them retell the story. We retell it as a large group. Now, if I have, say, 30 people in a Bible study, I'll break that down to 3 groups of 10. I'll say, you 10 go there, you 10 go there, you 10 go there. And I make them just go in a circle, retell the story. What do you remember? Retell that story. I want them to hear that story over and over and over. And in the book, the homework, I ask them to tell that story at least 3 times during the week, because we know until you tell that story to different people at least 5 times, it's not going to stay with you. And I really want these to stay with them. I was so tickled a couple of weeks ago. Our pastor was doing a sermon, and I wasn't at church, and he was like, oh, I was just going to pull her up here to do a story. And somebody who had been in one of my classes, she said, oh, I bet I could do it. And she got up and told the story. And she kind of fumbled through it a little, but he said, it was amazing. She got all the big parts of the story. I was like, oh, that was kind of a little bit of a feather in my cap. I was so proud of her. I was really happy with that. So if they do all the work, they will retain that story. That's a cool thing. Okay, then if you do have a book, on page 71 is where I put the summary lesson. So on page 71, you'll see I've got it in little boxes, and that's where I want them to summarize. So I did a summary for lesson 1 and lesson 2 so that they can see how very, very short those summaries should be. And I debated, should I put the summary at the end of each lesson? And I decided to move it to the back of the book because I wanted all these summaries together so that when they're finished with the 12 lessons, they can go through and read their 12 summaries and they have an overview of the Old Testament. So that's why I put it all right there on page 71. I like for them to write that summary before they leave class. If they want to get back with a friend, if they want to get into a group of 3 to write that summary, that's fine. If they want to do it on their own, that's fine. And then when they come back, so we've done lesson 2, when they come back for lesson 3, we read the summary from lesson 2. So, and in fact, I have even found When we get to lesson 5, I make them read all the summaries, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it takes a little bit, but not much. But you start to get that flow of stories. And the more and more I do this, the more and more I'm seeing how important that is. So, yeah, just have them keep doing those summaries. Now, the other thing they can do, don't everybody turn me off here. They can do it as a poem. And if you've got a book, you'll see that on page 74. And I tried to make this as easy and palatable as I could. So what I did, I took every story and I took the bulk of the story and created a 4-line poem. So so this is the way I set up the poems, because I'm sorry, I love poetry. It's my book, so you got to play my game a little bit. So here you'll see what I did. I took Genesis 21 to 23, or 22, and I wrote a 4-line poem to summarize those 22 verses. The Lord God made the heaven and earth, then he made a garden and placed man there. Man named the animals but needed a mate, so God created a woman to help him give care. And you'll see line 2 and line 4, they rhyme, okay? Then I ask my people, now you've got right here the last part. It's just Genesis 23, 24, and 25. Take those little bit and see if you can write a 4-line poem. So they don't have to look at the whole story. It's just this little bit. The man said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame." So can I challenge you? Can anybody looking at that, can you jot down a 4-line poem that summarizes Genesis 2, 23 through 25? I'll be quiet and give you a minute to do that. You're going to dazzle yourself with your brilliance. Okay, how's it going? Okay, is everybody ready to share? Okay, so let's hear some of your brilliant, let's hear some Wordsworth here. Who's ready to share?
It's just prose. She's like me. She's from me. I'll go with her and leave all I know. We are made for each other. This is how God made us to be one.
Good. Yeah, it sums up those 3 verses. Very good.
Well, here's mine. Man saw woman as his bone and flesh. Came from man, woman is her name. Men shall leave family to be one with his wife. Without clothes between them, they were not ashamed.
Oh, that's nice. Looks good. Sounds good. Anybody else willing to share? Chris or Maggie? Shaji?
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
Woman came from the flesh of man. When she came alive, she said, I can help this man. Yes, I can. With no shame, to her he came.
Oh, I like that. See, and wasn't that kind of fun to do that? Say yes. What about you, Chris?
Well, my very last word, I'm kind of lost on, but I just put together, God took a rib, Adam declared, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, now joined together, united as one, and then never to, and I've been stuck on the last word.
Oh, because it has to rhyme with flesh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes if you flip that and say flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone, bone might be an easier word to rhyme.
Ah, yeah. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, because flesh too, I'm like, I don't know. That is a tough one to rhyme. So sometimes if you just flip it around. Well, I put one together too, and it just said, the woman was made from man's flesh and bones. Now man leaves his parents to be with his wife. They were naked and bare, but felt no shame. Life in the garden could have been without strife. So if they write all those, then they've got, 2 quatrains for every story. They've got 24 quatrains in it. It's a good overview of the Bible. All right, so that is the overview of how to teach these classes. Next week, I think we're doing the triangle tool, and it's going to be me not talking too much. It's going to be you actually getting into small groups of 3 and working through that triangle. One of the things we talked about a lot with developing this was we know there's a large portion of people who their prime way of learning is not reading and writing. They don't want to be writing. They don't want to be reading. And I think we've built enough things in here that for the person who is more comfortable in an oral atmosphere, they can do so because they hear the story. I think that's a huge help for them. If, like you'll see next week when we do the triangle activity, if they don't want to write words in there, they can draw pictures, or they can just look at it and retain what they're doing. They can have their discussion. So I think, and I will admit, in the few times I've taught this class, I've always had people who they like to read and write. Okay, they're not so. But I think we've got enough things in here that we can help people who like more oral things. I do know the few times I've taught this class, it's always been, they've liked it. I know you can't count success by numbers, but I've always been kind of proud of the fact that when I do teach this class for the 12 lessons, I don't lose students. They come for all 12, and they stay till the bitter end. And I think it's because, and you'll see next week, that you're up, you're moving, you're talking, you're dialoguing, you're doing things. It's not junior high kids especially love it. Probably my biggest group, they bring in 100 high school kids every January, and they have me come in and tell stories, and then these are the activities that we do. And they've just loved it. It's really been successful. So So that's all I have for you today. And like I said, next week is not so much me talking, but you in small groups working.